I need some traction.
So thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having
me. It was a lot of fun digging into your career, and it looks like you've had an amazing one so far. One of the best fireside chats that I've ever seen was last year, and the questions were asked by Guy Marion, the guy that was just on stage. So I'm stealing a couple of his, and the only reason I'm saying that is because he's here and he's going to hear this. Tell us a little bit about this journey and some key inflection points from Malwarebytes to PagerDuty and all of this growth. Anything that stands out?
Sure, yeah. I mean, at the start, I like IT and cybersecurity, so I've been very lucky. I go for companies that I'm really passionate about. So that's always the leading driver. I don't think I'd necessarily be a great marketer at like a clothing or chocolate, but systems and technology is my jam. So you just follow your passion of what you're good at. I was really lucky, you know, Malwarebytes, I believe very much. They had a .org when I started. They were not a subscription-based business at all. They were completely almost a free product. The only revenue they were getting were some random people paying them money, actually, on the business side. So not so much a model, but wow, product market fit, because they built something great. And we had quite a ride there. And so I was there for 6 years. And then I was looking for something a little bit bigger. And in my mind, I thought, okay, I'm going to go do it again. And then a friend was like, why would you, go do something bigger, go scale to 1 billion. And it stuck in the back of my mind. And I was like, you know what, he's right. Why would I go back and repeat it? Like I thought I had to prove it again or something. But so I did that, joining PagerDuty just before they hit 100 million ARR. Just had IPO, but we're a small company. It's still the beginning of our journey. All the value creation has yet to come. So the MongoDB story, I don't know if he's still here, but that really resonated a lot. It's like flying while you're building all the pieces. So it can be a little tough, but ultimately rewarding.
That's great. You made a personal move as well, right? Across the country when we were talking, you mentioned it.
I did, yeah. I had just turned 30 when Malwarebytes called, and I just bought my first house by myself. I was really proud of it, yeah, in Philadelphia. And I said, no, and I kind of hung up the phone. I looked around my little house, and I was like, go to the back. And but it really was. It was about the mission and what they were doing. And it's in my fundamental beliefs that the internet is a community, and we've got to keep that community strong and protect it.
Absolutely. Everybody at TractionCon is coming because they want to build something big, much like you've done. Can you give us an overview of your growth framework or any tooling that you've implemented along the way?
Yeah, sure. We have 2 slides. If we...
Wrong slide. Is that one? Nope. The other way. Yep. There she is. That one?
Skip that one. We have 4 slides, but we'll talk about 2. Well, let me spend it. Can I spend a moment on this one real quick? So this is actually a slide that I used to get there. A really fast-growing company, just hitting 100 million ARR, but still a young company in every way. And what you tend to see in these companies is they're like really trying to figure out marketing. What the hell do we do? We're in all these segments. We need acquisition, conversion, retention. We need to build pipe gen. So this is actually a slide I used at the board last year, kind of coming in and taking an assessment. Here's how we're going to build the teams. Here's what we need. And PagerDuty is a land and expand model. So I found this graphic on the right. It's a business to developer to business model. The developer typically pulls us into an organization. You see viral expansion as they kind of put us onto other use cases. But trials and devs don't always scale to sales territory. Right, so you have to actually be doing outbound, and you have to be really good at it. And I've found that some companies, not just this one, can get kind of wrapped around which model should we be using, which kind of marketer should we be hiring. It's bottoms up, tops down, and it's like, well, it's going to be the hard thing about hard things. It's going to be both, right? And you're going to have to find ways to wrap around that and to lead through that. So I do use this slide here, and like some of these B2D programs are things that we have in place today. Like our documentation is our top red content. It's pretty funny. Like the marketers will produce all this content, and an engineer will post a blog about some new coding language, and it has like it outperforms everything. But that's that's our core audience, right? So we have like these B2D things that we use, and they're all driven by different teams, some of which are mine. And then we have B2B programs that we've also been scaling up at the same time to start helping do that tops-down motion. So, if we go to the next one, and then since these seem to be a little fun, but they're from Google Slides and I put into PowerPoint, so apologize, the lines are. So the fun part about this one, I think, was there was already a bunch of infrastructure in place. This company's 10 years young, so I'm coming along, and some of this stuff had been built by the founders years and years ago, and 2 of which had exited, some of which had been built by other eng. And in San Francisco, it's a pretty competitive market. So, we have retention programs in place for our people. Actually, it's a top initiative because you don't want to lose engineers past 2-3 years, because sometimes then you start to lose, like, who built this thing? And is there any documentation? So I found myself coming in as a marketer, like dusting off all this stuff and like, shit. Some of this stuff is 8 years old. It's great, but does anyone know how it works? No. So our trial onboarding, a lot of things. So Segment and Pendo were actually both in place. This was my first exposure to Segment, and what a great tool. I'm on their customer advisory board now, just out of pure fandom, and I'll be speaking at their conference next week, or next month actually, about a little more in depth of what we've done. So we actually re-instrumented Segment entirely for the entire product team and the entire platform, because that's what we need to do to be able to enable B2B growth and experimentation for the whole company. So it surely wasn't just something we could do for marketing. To do it right, we had to do it for all. So we took that, and we also took Pendo, which was at the time kind of being used decentralized. Not necessarily a great thing in B2B, so what we had, we would have teams kind of overlapping and shipping things into production. It happens, so we got ahead of it, identified that, and started to put some frameworks in place to alleviate that. And then everything on the left side, since I've joined, is what we've kind of built. So you all know Optimizely for testing, UTMs, we had to go through and rebuild everything, and demand-based Clearbit, whoever you want to use, for just IP lookup. So we use this to basically drive all of our account expansion, personalization, any kind of testing we want to do, and we enable this for all of our product teams also. And then before this happened, I've been there 6 quarters. It took about 6 months just to get the engineering in place and get the team in this type of mindset. This is a company with a 4.9 SLA that can never go down, so random testing was not something that we could take lightly. We have the web manifestos. I mean, it's a really serious engineering company. So to come along and to have the cloud, I set it up where all of our engineers are in my business unit. I pay for them, but they're actually all inside engineering, because as you might know, no engineer ever wants engineers outside of their org. So we had to spend a lot of time just getting everybody aligned. And we also took the marketing team at the time, which was 6 and is now 32, and transformed the way they work. So it is a company built in agile principles and everything we do. So we did move over to sprinting. We pulled in a coach to help the team. And what I saw was a pretty low morale at the time. There was a lot of stuff just landing on marketing, ship, do, and this was a way for them to kind of get proactive and to take advantage of their outlook and just be empowered. So we have multiple teams running on 2-week sprints. We set up the growth framework inside Jira, so all of the experiments and tests are just run throughout the process. And then this is basically how we enablement. So there was like a people, process, and retooling that we needed to do to get this to go. It took about a year, and as I mentioned, some trials and tribulations along the way, like code freezes and SLAs that we had to navigate. So
That's interesting. How do you deal with coming into an organization and a lot of different people having a lot of different ideas?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you get everybody in the same swim lane.
Yeah, well, I think marketers have I'm speaking as a marketer. I think they have a really amazing ability to not only see the customer, to see the business model, to see what the trends are. They're really at the intersection of everything. And so communication is a big one, and making sure that you communicate that out and frequently. But one thing I've also learned as I've gone is that sometimes companies just need to go through things. Like you can give the advice and do the, don't do this and don't do that. And sometimes that you just need to live and learn. And sometimes you got to ship things and learn in production. Yeah.
How about alignment of marketing and sales? Because you've gone into an organization, Malwarebytes, right? You had all of everything under you.
Yep.
How do you sort of get that alignment to work?
Yeah, I was running, because I was just there for so long, so we would spin up teams. So I had sales, I'd hired our SVP of sales over time. That's not my core, we would move that out. So I've taken that off my resume because I don't really want to be known for that, but I did hold a COO title for a small time. But marketing was always my passion. It was just these go-to-market teams. They're so close together, and how you set them up, you really do need somebody or a couple people working together very tightly. There's the customer journey that the customer goes through, and then there's like the internal customer journey of operationally, what are the handoffs and what teams are involved. So we had, the best of times, the worst of times. We had some great battles and fights, but we figured it out and we worked through it. At PagerDuty, we had even more complications, as I mentioned, as like an engineering-led culture, but really everybody, I think most people, I've been fortunate in this company, they all get it, and we all see what everyone brings to the table. So we've been able to align pretty easily. They get so excited when they see what like this team can help them do. We have these propensity to buy models. We've been enabling all this stuff in Salesforce. The sales reps love it. They're like, you can tell me what's going on in my account in real time, and like what kind of alerts they're getting, what kind of things they're facing on a day-to-day basis. So we've had some really great synergies there.
That's great.
Yeah.
How do you decide how to allocate your time between, conversion, acquisition, upsell, and also how often does that focus change?
Yeah. At Malwarebytes, we were B2C and B2B. And here at PagerDuty, it's a B2B only business, but as I mentioned, kind of the model's a little interesting. So I definitely had really strong retention programs in place at Malwarebytes, dedicated people on it, because it was a consumer business. And I do believe so much in the last presentation, like just the cost to acquire, especially when you have this like hyper competitive markets. It is hard, right? You're dealing with like a never-ending capital. That's what you're competing against, right? So you've got somebody in there and they're engaged and they like your product, hang on to them. Now, with that said, the time I spend on it always isn't, because there's always that pressure to deliver net new logo, right? So I will say at PagerDuty, for the first 6 quarters, we do have churn targets based on net new ARR, expansion, and downgrade. But acquisition and conversion were like the first focus, getting the teams working, because we do have a customer success team who's on it. But we've started building some churn models, and this is where we're headed. So, yeah.
That's great. I'd love to hear, and you can pick one of the biggest successes in an experiment, maybe a specific experiment, or one of the biggest failures. Sure. I think people like hearing about that too.
Yeah. I'll share a couple from Malwarebytes, and I do fundamentally believe that if you're going to be doing some growth and some experimentation, and however you set the teams up, there's lots of different ways, but the core value prop of what the product is where you want to be spending your time. Right. And sometimes that can be an onboarding, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's actually deeper in the product. So in cybersecurity, what we were finding was, our researchers would add threats as they would find them and see them, but there's, a proliferation of crapware and adware and junkware, and it wasn't really something we were paying attention to. We would just kind of add them into our database ad hoc, and we were seeing, so a marketer brought to the researchers, and like, I think we should be doing more of this, these potentially unwanted programs. No, they're not malware, but people really hate them, So we ran a couple experiments, and we ended up doing a massive database update that was hundreds of millions of users in usage, and is still in place today. So that's like, but those are the ones, like, it goes really close to product. You're talking about R&D, but it really goes back to customer value at the end of the day. And like, where you want to be spending your time is on the customer value stuff over the button color stuff and those kinds of things, which, and I say that because it still tends to happen. Like, I'll see some of the experiments and you're like, okay, not as important, cool, but like, let's try to stay focused on the things that are closer to what the user wants.
Yeah.
So
was that difficult to roll out or to get everybody on board to do that?
No, not that one. We had another one which was a little more hacky. There were these, so this is going back a couple years, there were these really malicious rootkits that would blue screen Windows computers, which I know, so going back a couple years, I guess, but they would blue screen computers, and so pretty serious threat, and we had some great engineers that would figure out ways to kind of like quarantine these and isolate them, but we would actually have to reboot the machines to be able to get rid of it without taking the computer out. And so one of the things that we did, which was a little more hacky, was when we would do this, we would actually take people who hadn't converted in trial, and we would kind of reset the trial and have them go through the trial experience again, and we would see huge lifts every time we would do it. Not exactly as smart, but there was a hacky thing we were doing behind the scenes. So, and then I would say for biggest failures, don't, I do fundamentally believe in testing, and you've got to really have an idea before you ship something into production of what it's going to do and how you're going to measure it. But when you're going fast, sometimes things happen, and the biggest things I've seen that have been mistakes have been things that were shipped that weren't really tested.
That's interesting. Let's shift focus to operations a little bit.
Sure.
Because you've been in a number of different sized growth groups. How do you currently have your growth team organized? And if you had to do it over again, would you change anything?
Yeah, sure. So I have a growth prod team. We haven't spent time rebranding it. I haven't been there long enough, so we should give it a cool name, but it's just really called growth prod. And those are the people who are really working in that SLA and working deep in the product. We also have a performance marketing team. I've got a couple other teams that aren't as relevant to this conversation, but all of this architecture that you see on the screen here was built by that growth prod team. And then we also have a marketing operations team, pretty classic B2B, but all of our users do flow through Salesforce because we are mostly a sales-assisted model. And that marketing ops team and the growth prod team, there's a lot of things like demand-based. There's a lot of areas where we need to come together. So we kind of call this the pre-lead team. Yeah. And then once they're MQL on, it passes to a different team because things like time to opportunity close, all your traditional B2B metrics like kick in. So, and then in terms of how this team is set up, data scientists, we've got a couple eng. It hasn't been flavorized yet, and that's what I'm thinking about next is how we're going to do it. So we really just spent the time, the tooling, the processes, and now I'm thinking about what the swim lanes are going to be for that growth prod team.
That's great.
Yeah.
So that was one of my questions.
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah, and I went to an Amplitude conference in San Francisco recently because they had Andy Johns there, and he has a little book that he published online. It's on his website, and I really like his commentary around don't ship the org chart. And it's like this thing that happens. And we have some little elements of that as we've moved fast and people are just going. And he said at Wealthfront, they would really structure their growth teams based on, what are the 2 to 3 things that are going to make our vision be realized in a couple years. And it really resonated with me. I'm like, wow, if I would think about the PagerDuty journey, right? It's really about syncing your systems and taking ownership and going on call. But then once you've got that process going, there's a set of other processes and value adds that we add, which are postmortem, how to learn, just continuous improvement systems. So that's what I'm thinking about. We haven't made decisions yet, but that's basically what we're going to do for next year. Talk about these things openly with the team because I like them to kind of buy into what we're going to do. We could absolutely say, here's the e-commerce checkout team and here's this team, but that doesn't really help, solve what the customer's trying to get done. So I'm leaning towards going this way, and I'm excited to see that happen.
That's great.
Yeah.
For you personally, Rebecca, what's one thing that you do well or that you try to do or maximize to help you personally stand out?
Yeah. He sent me this question. I was like, well, one thing I could say is the reason I've been successful. I mentioned sharing passion, but it's really about the team, and I hire people who are specialized in areas because you're talking about building a bottoms-up, tops-down motion, and it is confusing. Right. So you find experts, and you clear the way, and you let them lead. And I've done this a couple times, and it's something I'm really proud of. So I can be proud of my hacks and the revenues, but I was out over the weekend, an old employee who's retired. She said, hey, if you move back to San Jose, I'd come out of retirement and work for you again. And that's the stuff that really matters to me. Yeah. So it really is all about the team and making sure they have a clear runway to be able to deliver this stuff, because people do want to build, but you got to get rid of the nonsense that can always happen especially in high growth. Yeah.
So this is a softball, but what's the most important character trait? Any advice to, let's say, a young growth executive, or what would you tell yourself that you might know now but didn't, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I've got a lot of young folks now. This came up actually in a couple of the talks, just what's next? I actually had someone was getting promoted, and when do I get promoted again? And it's in 6 months, and I was like, whoa, what are you trying to achieve here? But it's about the experiences and the continuous learning, which is awesome. And let's dig in a little more, and I think that. The growth path is so important for folks, and I see a lot of young folks working so hard in their 20s and, kind of asking, what do I do? Do I get an MBA? What do I do? And I really think the answers are always there. You just kind of have to lean into it. I always knew I had this strange obsession with the community and the internet, and I wanted to protect it. It wasn't necessarily a job title by any means, but it's been there and guiding. So I ask folks to kind of lean into who you are. Don't try to keep changing in the next thing, but get good at what you're good at now. Yep. So yeah,
that's great advice. Great advice for everybody.
Yeah.
Let's talk about specific channels. And 2019, things are changing all the time. Everybody knows that. Yeah. What channels are working for you right now? What are you investing more in? What are you taking money out of?
Yeah, I'm not investing in TikTok, but I think it's so cool. It's nothing to do with what we do, but I'm on there every night. They get my oldest nieces and nephews were it's not cool, and then I spent some time with my 9-year-old nephew, and I'm completely obsessed. What a channel! It's cool, but has nothing to do with the PagerDuty. We have all the classic channels, but if you did go back to that slide and you see that B2D area, they're really all low CAC things, as much as they're not performance channels, right? Things like documentation aren't even really things that a marketer might be thinking about, but that's where all of our traffic and sources come from. People are looking for how-tos, they're looking for ways to automate, get their work done. So we do have the whole plethora of, that's all right, I think they remember. But we do have all the plethora of channels, and it is always a balance, because I think things like SEM are easy, but they're not the game changers that something like in this engineering-led company, if you're doing these B2D type things, those are the game changers, because that really resonates with who what they're looking for.
And if you had to pick one tool or platform that's the most important, what would you say?
We are, at PagerDuty, our businesses are very similar. We are big fans of Segment. I think everything that they're doing is pretty amazing. I think their data posture is amazing, not being the central, but being the pass-through. They've enabled us to, when there's no time, to basically take all these systems and to be able to move fast. So I would probably vote for Segment.
Okay, great. We've got a couple of minutes. Does anybody have any questions from the audience before we move on? Okay. Okay, great.
Drinks?
I think so. And then we can talk about what's wrong with Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So listen, it's been a pleasure having you here and getting to know what you've done. Thanks for all of the advice. If you guys would please help me say thanks to Rebecca Kline. Thanks. Thanks, Rebecca. Great job.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.